So we are going to talk about how the mobile industry boosts digital trust. Digital identity, as you all believe, I'm sure, is crucial to the success of digital transformation across many consumer and business services. And mobile is really a bridge between the physical and the digital world. It's that window into that digital world that bridges us as people to our digital selves. And because of that, we think it can help in building that humanized digital identity. So we're going to discuss where mobile authentication is heading, hear about digital identity perspectives across sectors, and explore public-private and cross-industry collaboration to build this humanized identity layer. Here to help me achieve this, I've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'll introduce them as we go along. And as for me, I'm your host today. I'm Hélène Viguet. I look after identity and data at the GSMA, and my role is to connect the ecosystem and facilitate those mobile identity and data opportunities. Let me share an overview of our plan for this session. We will have a strong focus on mobile authentication. We will start with some insight on the recent trends in the SMS one-time password market. We'll have an exciting panel trying to predict how the evolution towards passwordless might take shape. And MasterCard will then share their approach to passwordless before we look further ahead to the advent of digital identity wallets in Europe. And finally, we will explore how the mobile industry can collaborate with governments and verticals such as the payment industry to build tomorrow's identity solutions. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome on stage Nick Lane. Nick is Chief Insight Analyst at Mobile Squared, a wealth of knowledge on business messaging, and he'll set the scene on SMS one-time password. Please give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's check we've got... okay, there we go. So I need to point that way. It's great to be here. So I'm here to talk about the rise and fall of one-time passwords in SMS. So Mobile Squared, we specialise in providing data and insights and forecasts in the messaging space. So for us, one of our core areas is SMS. We also look at the likes of WhatsApp, Viber, RCS, Facebook Messenger, so on and so forth. But today what we're going to do is just really kind of give you a brief overview of where the one-time password is, because obviously that's really kind of very much setting up the scene for the discussion and the follow-up presentations and discussions over the next hour and a half. You really do, don't you? Okay, so this is based on our view from international traffic for one-time passwords across our forecast period. So if you can't see at the back, our data starts in 2017 and it runs all the way at the moment up to 2027. And what you're basically seeing is in terms of the split between use cases and international traffic on SMS, that one-time passwords now, or in 2022, account for about 89% of total traffic. We're expecting them to account for about 86% of total traffic in 2023, and we're kind of predicting a gradual decline over our forecast period down to about 64% by the end of 2027 through natural attrition, through the major brands who obviously account for the majority of traffic on the international scene, looking for alternatives in terms of authentication. What we're actually seeing is a slight change. This is the view right now, so I don't know how many of you are aware of what's going on in the SMS space, but there's a lot of high international termination rates around the world. So the brands that used to spend about 3 cents to send one one-time password at the start of 2021, in certain markets now, if you're going to terminate on certain operators, you could be spending up to about 28 cents to deliver one message. So that's incredible inflation over that period. So that's having a massive impact on brands and kind of looking at how they invest in SMS and their use of one-time passwords. So this is our revised view based on the ongoing data that we get from the messaging community. And as you can see, there's a massive drop in traffic. But on top of that, there's a huge shift away in terms of spend away from one-time passwords on SMS. So whilst we're predicting one-time passwords to account for about 60, I think, what do you say, 64, 65% in 2027 of total traffic, that figure's going to drop to about 45%. So that's a big fall. And just to kind of show that in context on its own, that's a CAGR drop of negative 15.9%. That's a huge shift. So what we've done, if we look at the traffic, what does this actually mean? And all we do, in terms of the total traffic decline, that accounts for a drop in spend of about $7 billion. That's massive. It's not that, because all we've done is kind of apply it to the average international termination rate, which is 0.07 right now. But what we're seeing is, in actual fact, around 200 billion messages were sent in 2022. By 2027, that's going to be well below 100 billion messages. That's a massive fall, huge fall. And whilst it's have phenomenal growth over our forecast period, this 10 years, it's also falling from grace, primarily because of the spend. So I'll just come here. So these are the top 40 international termination rates by market. And you can see Azerbaijan at the top. So the average rate there across all operators is 24 cents. So you can see here, if you break down by market, the amount of operators, the actual markets that are over a certain figure. So we obviously look at the 3 cents mark as the kind of the halcyon days of old, when brands are very happy spending three cents to send a message, and then you start to look at the number of markets, for example, how much they're spending. So you've got 46 markets that it costs between 10 cents and 20 cents to deliver a message. This shows the increase in termination rate over a 6-month period last year by mobile operators, which does suggest that even though brands are starting to shift their spend and move away from SMS and look for alternatives, operators are still increasing their prices around the world. So in terms of demand, supply and demand, there's a big issue here, because what we're seeing is a massive drop in traffic. So I just need to go back. One more. There we go. So again, this is our view from 2023 when we closed the annual forecast process for SMS. And this is what we're expecting. We're expecting about 600 billion messages or so to migrate onto WhatsApp. And this is accounted for around about 300 billion messages. And all in all, it's about 1 trillion messages we're expecting by 2027 to leave the SMS environment and move on to other platforms, alternative solutions. So obviously the big demand there is to move on to WhatsApp, but this is the alternative solution. And this is potentially where, not so much where the traffic will go, but this is probably accounting for where the spend will go. And that's really where kind of the opportunity comes as part of the migration onto alternative authentication channels. Again, since we've revised this is our revised view from last month based on the data. And as you can see now, rather than trillion, we're looking at about 1.6 trillion messages that potentially would leave, that will no longer be on the SMS ecosystem or on the kind of SMS networks. And this kind of starts to show that SMS potentially is in decline, but it also again shows what the alternative solutions are, and it shows that brands are starting to think differently. Got to be a sniper to make this work. Right, I've skipped one. There we go. So again, this is our view in 2023. What we're starting to see was actually, we saw that 4 markets were in decline in terms of total international traffic by the end of 2023. Darker blue represents markets in decline. Now, because of what's happened in 2023, in particular, the second half of 2023 and the fourth quarter in particular, this is what the market now looks like. So pretty much every market from an international traffic perspective is in decline. Now, it's probably more dramatic than it actually looks. And most of these markets are probably either 0.01% or just a small percentage point in decline. And that's because some of the major brands, the Metas, the Googles, etc., they're changing their SMS spend. They're looking for the alternatives. And obviously when you've got Facebook, which accounts for about 20% of total traffic, when they shift some of its traffic, it has a dramatic effect on the whole world. So that's kind of painting the picture here. But we're expecting, again, going back to our figures for last year, we're expecting a decline, certainly of international traffic, and expediting the brand authentication process onto alternative platforms. So I just want to leave you with this slide. This is something that we've done for a client, part of a project. This was research from 60 CPaaS providers to get their view of their understanding of where their trust is and also represent the views of their clients. And they obviously have thousands and thousands of clients. And I think the key thing here is this, again, on the left looks at the 5 key channels of the world of CPaaS, which is email, voice, SMS, RCS, and WhatsApp. And it's really looking at where's their trust. This is 2023 view. This is 2025 view. So what you're seeing is a shift in trust over the next couple of years of the traditional channels, moving away from email, voice, and SMS, and moving on to the likes of WhatsApp and RCS. So again, in terms of a brand thinking, certainly from a messaging perspective, they are now starting to explore ways of what they can use those channels for. We're certainly seeing that with WhatsApp, and we believe that WhatsApp commercially is probably about 3 to possibly 5 years ahead of RCS. And yes, RCS is finally starting to happen. And that's my brief view of the world of SMS. So I hope you found it useful. Thank you.
Thanks for the insight, Nick. We're going to invite our panelists to take their place on stage now. Let me introduce your moderator for this session. So Glyn Pova at Telefonica. He leads the product development globally for the digital identity business, and he'll moderate a session on where mobile authentication is heading. And you'll introduce all our panelists. So please, all come on stage.
Great. So thanks for joining us this morning. So I introduced myself. I'm Glyn Pova at Telefonica. I've been in the mobile industry for over 20 years now. I actually started out those 20 years ago working on the X Factor, which was not in the initial job description, doing the text voting and SMS campaigns every Saturday night for the ITV studios. But actually, more latterly, in the last 8 years, I've been mostly focused on digital identity, mobile identity, whatever you want to call it, and building a business in Telefonica globally using B2B APIs, leveraging our SIM cards and mobile phone numbers so that we can actually build out an identity business. And you'll see that that's evolved into a much bigger platform and initiative, which is much talked about at this conference, which is called Open Gateway. And Open Gateway has a very large number of identity APIs as its kind of launch category. So I think we can say we've hit the big time. At least we made the keynote, so that's pretty big news. But I wanted to introduce the panel. We've got a fantastic panel here, which can bring a real global view, I think, from around the world, not just Europe, but also in the US and Asia as well. And we want to have a really good debate about how we see the future of passwordless authentication evolving. Nick's talked about SMS and SMS OTPs. That's been the go-to way for consumers to log in to services and register with services and prove that they are who they say they are. But clearly, there's new technologies on the scene, and we're gonna understand a bit more about that today during this conversation. So let me introduce the panel for speed, and then we'll get straight into the conversation. So Christian, who's here next to me, Christian Brand at Google. And I'm glad to see you've got your Passkeys t-shirt, Christian. So wearing your heart on your sleeve. So Christian is leading Google's next generation authentication efforts, which includes passkeys and moving to secure carrier-based authentication technologies. Christian is also co-chair of the FIDO2 technical working group at the FIDO Alliance. and the standards body working on the specifications for passkeys. Next up, we've got Paul Maguire. Paul is CEO at ID Layer and co-founder of that business, the world's mobile identity provider. ID Layer is building the internet's missing identity layer using mobile numbers as identity credentials. They deliver strong and visible security that removes complexity for users and helps businesses to eliminate fraud and cut costs. Next up, and giving us a view from another part of the world, we've got KY from Singtel. KY is the VP of Enterprise Products and responsible for Singtel voice and data networks, ICT, cyber, enterprise, mobile, and IoT portfolio of services. And finally, Nick, who's got probably the best job title, at least I stole this from your website, Nick. Chief Messaging Officer and Messageologist at Mobile Squared Limited, the world's leaders in mobile intelligence. So please welcome the panel. But I wanted to start by sort of posing a question and really looking at the customer side of this industry and ask, why is it so important for brands and consumers to adopt password authentication? Why should consumers care? We're all consumers in this room. We all use multiple services online on our mobile phones. I think, according to Dashlane, most consumers have about 240 accounts online and on their mobile phones, which is a huge number. Most of those are secured by probably only passwords and usernames today. Some have deployed multi-factor authentication. A lot of that is SMS OTP, and with some newer technologies coming in. But if you think about it from a consumer perspective, and I think as industry we don't often think about it as consumers, even though we are all consumers. Why should they care? Is our passwords actually broken? I think that's the kind of debate we want to have today. I don't have too much trouble logging into most of my services. I've got quite a few of the high-value ones in my password account manager. So it does a pre-fill when I'm on my mobile phone or my web browser. And actually, do you know what? If I forget my password or it's not in my password manager, I just do password reset, which is a fantastic feature invented to log into any service when you've forgotten your password. Also, I think enjoyed by fraudsters and criminals, the password reset feature. So there is that side of it, of course, and I think that's what we'll get onto, the scam side and the fraud side, which is driving a lot of customer experience problems and costs for brands. But I'd be interested to know in the audience, do you share my view? My view is kind of, passwords are a bit of a pain, but they're not so much of a pain that, it bothers me in my day-to-day life. What does the audience think about passwords? Are they a big problem? Do they bother you? Hands up if they bother you or they're a pain. So probably a bit less than half, actually, which maybe is an interesting stat for our session, which is, why should consumers care and how do we get consumers to adopt? And how do we get brands, to nudge consumers in the direction of these new technologies? And maybe I can, turn to Christian first from Google, and maybe help answer that question. What is Google doing to help nudge consumers, and why do you think they should care?
That's a great question. Hi, everyone. I'm Christian. I work on account systems at Google. So we are driving or actively trying to drive users away from passwords. And I think if you think about this from the perspective of what we call in the industry a relying party, which is the person, offering the service provider is Google, we have a slightly different goal than the user. And then maybe these goals intersect at some point again. I'll talk about that in a second. Our goal is security and privacy. We want to make it as secure for a user to sign into an account. We want to keep the bad guys out, but at the same time, we want to keep the good guys in. So friction is actually a component we both share. We want friction to be very little for users to get into their accounts, but at the same time, consumers want friction to be very, very low as well. And I think that's where we find the common denominator between these two proposals. So when we start talking about passwordless, at the back of our mind, we're thinking security, but all our messaging and everything that we're building is around user convenience, speed, and ease of use. That is what we found that resonates. So it's no secret, I'm sitting here today with a Passkeys t-shirt. We're working very, very hard on trying to move the world away from the traditional password model. also away from the traditional multi-factor authentication model to a new world where users use these technologies, which is kind of like assembled as passkeys. We're working with our other, larger technology provider companies. It's no or secret here, Microsoft and Apple has kind of joined us on this endeavor, and then we have a range of other relying parties or service providers that has also started to offer some solutions based on passkeys. So for us, our goal, security, the user's goal, convenience, and then our shared goal is trying to get that conversion rate from not signed in to signed in up north of 95%. And with passkeys, we think we can achieve that vision along both axes.
Great, thanks, Christian. And then to keep with, I guess, with the theme of consumer convenience and maybe even consumer familiarity of how they access many services. And certainly one of the themes we've been promoting in the telecoms industry is about familiarity. So using your phone number as your mobile identity, as your identity credential to access services. And I think, we're working on new ways of doing that. So it's not necessarily about SMS in the future, but it is about using your phone number on your SIM card as your mobile identity, but in a new ways. And maybe Paul, your company is very much invested in this idea. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in ID Layer?
Sure. So I think just to build on what Christian was saying, I think, and your question earlier on, Glyn, should users care? So do they care about passwords? A few people in the room clearly do, but actually my view is that passwords, we're like at maximum MFA right now. The way that security works in the world is every time we need more security, we load it onto the users. So it started with basic passwords, and then became more complicated passwords, and you have to change them every 3 months. Then you had to get an SMS OTP, and now we've got to learn passkeys. Now, I love passkeys, right? I'm a fan of passkeys, but it's just one more thing we have to learn, and that's just kind of the paradigm we have is it's always on the user. And I think one of the problems is that humans, we're all lazy. We would rather have nothing to do. So from a password perspective, I'd rather just not have to worry about another thing. So how do you solve that? Well, actually, the view that we have is that you kind of want to take the human out of the security paradigm. And you want to have security that's just invisible and that just works. And you think, well, actually, no, that's just not possible. But then everyone in this room uses invisible security that just works every day, and you don't know about it. So I switch my phone off at night, my mobile phone off at night, and I switch it on in the morning. I unlock the handset with a PIN, but I never have to log on to the network. Whether it's Telefonica or Vodafone or AT&T, I never have to log on to the network. But I always get the right bill at the end of every month. So how's that possible? That's probably the only service, the only online service that you never have to log onto. Yet it works. And it works because there's a silent authentication between the network and the SIM card in your phone, cryptographically secure, works every time, and you as a user, we never have to do anything about it. That's how security should be. It should be strong, and it should just be invisible to the user. And so that's what we're doing with MNOs like Telefonica to roll out phone number verification using core carrier APIs to get the frictionless experience that Christian talked about. And if you then couple that with passkeys, then you potentially got a gold standard solution.
Thank you, Paul. And then just turning to a more global perspective, KY, can you tell us how you see the world in Singapore and Southeast Asia? Is there strong use of SMS out there? Are brands and telcos promoting other password authentication solutions?
Sure. I think for our part of the world where telcos are, I think there are a few things that we were looking at. One, of course, you look at what Paul mentioned. Telcos owns a lot of data, and they are often authentic and a source of truth. Like we know how much to bill you, we know where you are, we know where you live, and we feel we can put those data to better use, and that's why we see. As what Christian was saying, SMS coming down, what do we do about it? Yeah, there's a few things. One is through APIs, open gateways that GSMA is pushing, we find some form of open standards that we can push things out. So it helps customers to look at things in a more standardized manner. It helps consumers to be able to authenticate seamlessly without worry about phishing, without worrying about interception of SMS. So that's one thing we see clearly in our market. that we want to look for adoption further in this area. And the other area that even our own customers, like enterprises, are telling us there's better workflow and efficiency when you use APIs versus using SMS. There's a lot of tweaks they do, and you'll see a lot of financial institutes like banks. They are moving towards in-app notification. Why? Because SMS is a bit difficult to make sure they manage it well. But at the same time, when they move in-app, it becomes seamless. And in the same manner, APIs can do the same form, but in a more secure and more authentic manner. Thank you.
Great, thanks, KY. And then back to Nick. From your presentation, you were talking about, the move away from SMS OTP, and I think that maybe that surprised some of us since we've had it for so long and we're so familiar with it. But in terms of those other technologies that are coming along, and you talked mostly about messaging ones. I mean, do you think that's something that's going to happen, as fast as you talked about, or and WhatsApp and those other channels, are they really growing in a big way?
None of the rich messaging channels are growing in a massive way. I mean, they've been around for a long time, and they're still relatively small, given the size of their actual kind of active monthly user base. But it's growing. So with WhatsApp, for example, we expect it in terms of revenues to be worth about $2.5 billion this year. So it's crossing the $1 billion mark this year, and it's starting to enjoy some good growth. But part of that is some of the migration over from, as I was showing, the international traffic on SMS moving on to WhatsApp. But the trouble is, it's kind of the WhatsApp pricing is quite confusing. Although it's got one rate, are they targeting the international rate or the domestic rate? Because obviously, if you actually look at it and you do it on a market by market basis, I think about 120 markets are cheaper for SMS if you compare WhatsApp to domestic rates. But it flips if you then look at it from the international side of things. So again, it depends where the traffic is and where it's terminating. That's going to have a big decision and a big impact in terms of what's happening. But on the international scene, companies like Meta, for example, are turning to WhatsApp, where it is a much cheaper, viable alternative. So we're starting to see that kind of migration accelerate. But interestingly, where the high termination rates are, they really only account for about 5% of total traffic. So in actual fact, although in each market there's some dramatic shifts happening in traffic, the traffic's actually really small. If for example, we're to see it in major markets like North America or across Europe or India, then I think there'd be widespread panic across the SMS industry because there'd be massive shifts. But because it's quite small, it's almost manageable at the moment, but it's definitely happening.
Great, thanks, Nick. And then I guess, price obviously is a consideration for many brands, but you mentioned India, and that sort of leads me to my next point about regulation. So, I mean, around the world, regulators are looking closely at authentication or identity in a broader sense. And I think, we've seen developments in India and other countries where, some regulators are being quite tough on scams and fraud, which in some cases are out of control. And they're actually enforcing new regulations where actually forcing brands, and never mind nudging, the brands nudging their consumers. It's actually, the regulators and the governments actually, telling brands that they need to adopt more secure authentication methods, even if they don't want to, and even if consumers don't want it, as we talked about. Is there anyone on the panel who wants to give us a kind of regulation view of how you see that maybe driving this evolution towards passwordless or blocking it even?
Yeah, I can make a comment. I mean, I think we're working in a number of markets that I would characterize as more sort of mobile first. So we're in India, we're in Mexico, and I guess what we're seeing from sort of brand adoption of non-SMS identity and authentication is that it's driven typically by two or three things. So regulation is obviously one. If you're in the financial services sector, in certain territories, that's becoming something which is regulated because they recognize that it's just SMS is not secure enough, and there are alternatives now, like phone number verification or in future passkeys. So the regulation is one, and then revenue is actually the second, and then cost is probably the third. So we're working, for example, with some banks in Latin America, they had big fraud problems, and so you'd think that that would be a motivator to try and change the actual authentication methods. But actually the driver that got them to take action was a revenue-based one. So they found that when fraud happened and someone got phished, if those users then posted on social networks, the sign-ups to the bank dropped by 30%. And that was a sort of C-level revenue impact. And so then they said, right, we've got to do something about it. And so they implemented this new technology. So we're now working with them on deploying phone number verification, which is going to help them cut fraud and streamline the user journey and lower their costs. But it was a revenue driver that actually got them to do it. So regulation is important, but actually also revenue is key too.
Great, thanks, Paul. And then, KY, can you give us a similar perspective from Southeast Asia? How do you see regulation driving or blocking the market and towards passwordless?
I think where we come from, there's increasing framework from regulators on banks and telcos, what we call a shared responsibility framework. And that's putting pressure, like what Paul mentioned, on the operators. And that's why we think that one is key to have very open standards where developers in the ecosystem can then develop apps that conform with regulations. And the open standards are key to make sure that when they develop ones, they can apply to all markets. And that helps to promote a lot of standardization and also paves the way for regulation to be more effective. And that's why we see that Open Gateway is one thing that we are very fully supportive, and hopefully it'll be the way to come for years.
Great, thank you. And then Christian, can I just come to you for the same point around regulation, maybe more from a US perspective or even a global perspective, how you see that driving, for passkeys or even other authentication solutions like we've talked about, the mobile operator kind of seamless authentication?
Yeah, I mean, regulation for us is sometimes a little bit challenging, especially if you are trying to push the envelope a little bit on newer, I want to say, types of authentication, newer methodologies, passkeys for one. We have certain places in the world, specifically countries like in Europe. I think India is a little bit of an edge case right now, because in India there is an active push against SMS OTP right now as a mechanism to do authentication for particular reason, which I'll get to. But in other parts of the world, let's take Europe, for example, there is still a very big requirement around 2FA multi-factor authentication, specifically kind of like in the payment space with PSD2 or SCA, the Secure Customer Authentication Framework, which kind of like requires phone number-based authentication in some way, shape, or form. Now, if we want to push passkeys there, that's a bit of a challenge. However, if we want to do some of the stuff that Paul was talking about, and I want to touch on some of those things in a second here, then it's kind of like green fields, because we are still going to be using the operator or the carrier identity. And just to take a step back at that point, I kind of believe that passkeys and carrier-based identity is two parts or two halves of the same whole. Passkeys solve certain requirements in certain cases. In other cases, and especially for Google, there is still the need to go outside of a system where we're kind of like the root of trust. If you think about the way that passkeys are going to work, it works much in the same way that your password manager works today. Some system somewhere is storing your passkeys for all your accounts. When you lose access to that system, let's say that system is Android or your Google account, you need an external source of identity to get back in. Today, our external source of identity that works at scale globally is carrier identity or phone-based identity, right? That is the one system that is ubiquitous across the globe. It scales extremely well. It works fairly reliably. The challenge is the level of security over time has become eroded because of phishing and a bunch of other things. It's not the inherent carrier network trust that's the problem. It is the way in which we deliver the service. SMS, if you think about it, is actually a pretty terrible way to authenticate a user. It's not because there is an issue with the carrier identity, it's because that is the technology that was ubiquitous and was available at that point in time. Here's kind of like our vision, as a Google account representative, in the same way that Paul said, today you take your SIM card, if you still have a phone with a physical SIM, you put it in, you turn it on and your phone works. You don't log on to the carrier network. You don't type a username and a password. why couldn't that also apply to you getting access to your Google account on that phone? If your SIM card is inserted in your phone, why don't you get your Gmail and your YouTube and everything just starts working? There's no technical reason why things can't flow through in this way. We just need to build those rails. And network-based APIs and SIM-based authentication is essentially what allows us to move into that world where not only are users more secure, but at the same time, they're getting a much, much simplified user experience. Rather than having a user every time they upgrade their phone, having to create a brand new Google account and lose out on everything else that they had, what if they could just continue exactly where they left off? So to touch back onto regulation, regulation for us is kind of both a pro and a con. In places like India, we think it's great because it's pushing the industry towards the next gen, what comes after. Now, there's always this beta versus VHS conversation that comes up. We're hoping that regulation will really push us into the right direction and not just into, you know, a duplicate of what we've got. But that's where folks here, that's where industry participation really, really helps. And then in Europe and other places, I think there is still a little bit of work to do to bring some of these newer technologies into the fold. But we're all working very, very hard, I think, and I'm sure folks in this room as well, on trying to kind of, like I said earlier, push the envelope a little bit on what is coming, what is better, in a way to really truly give users what they ultimately need, which is better security, and what they want, which is simplicity.
Great, thanks, Christian. And then I think, you know, really interesting site about this, the kind of gold standard of combining carrier authentication, simple authentication with passkeys. I think, you know, we do, the carriers do believe that that's going to be a great combination or gold standard. But Paul, I mean, your business is heavily invested in this. Can you kind of, you know, extend your thoughts on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we see it. I mean, you said in the intro that we sort of position ourselves as trying to build a missing identity layer for the internet, and rather, as Christian said, we see it as mobile identity, and I think that's the sort of value prop that we're trying to pitch to the customers that we're selling to. I think, you know, if you go back to right at the beginning, the question, which is how do we migrate from where we are today to some sort of future which is more secure and less friction. The challenge is how to get both users and brands to that. And so if you're pushing a technology solution which requires both a user adoption and a brand adoption, then it's kind of double the level of effort. The beauty of mobile identity is it's actually deployed to 5 billion plus users today. So everyone here has in their phone, in their pocket, in their hand, a phone which has that secure mobile identity capability already built in. So if we're able to leverage that, one half of the problem goes away, and it's no longer a user adoption issue, it's then just a brand issue. And then it comes down to understanding the messaging, and there is a lot of messaging actually in marketing required to get brands to realize that they can realize business benefits from adopting this technology. But it's only half the problem. So you can focus on the brand adoption rather than the user adoption. I think that's one of the key values.
Brilliant, thanks very much. So I think you know, we're drawing to a close now, but it's been a great discussion from the panel here to understand a little bit about where we see the industry going, how the telcos can play a role, but also, you know, how new technologies like passkeys and FIDO2 are really, you know, going to drive a new evolution. But also, you know, consumers need to play their part in that, and they need to be willing, and you know, they need to, you know, in some ways have a seamless experience, but also there's an education role there. And there's a regulation role. But I wanted to kind of go back through the panel as we wrap up now, maybe starting with Nick, and just give us your predictions about, you know, what you see in the next, you know, how long is it going to take to get to passwordless? What do you see in the next 2, 3, 5 years?
Typically what we see is everything probably takes a lot longer than we expect. I think that's a simple answer, to be honest. So, you know, you'll start to see kind of a lot more kind of passkey action happening in the next couple of years, but I imagine it'll still stay on quite a small scale. And I think part of the issue there is the fact that everyone's using multiple devices. So the way that I log on to various devices is fundamentally different. So on my MacBook, it's passkey. So, but, you know, that's fine. I'm not quite a technophobe yet, but also I'm getting old. But, you know, you kind of look at different ages. You know, I look at my parents and think, how are they going to cope with this? This is kind of the concern. And, you know, in a lot of markets, there are aging populations. My parents still write down every password. You know, they've got pages and pages of them in their diary. So it's not hard to crack. Not that I'm going to, but I think that's where we are. Whereas, with kids, if my kids want to crack onto my phone, they'll just go, Dad, and they're holding my phone at my face, and then the biometrics kick in, and they're into my phone. So, all these things are kind of, I guess we've got to worry about as we move forward. But now I think it's suddenly happening. And I think one thing I didn't say in the presentation is ultimately the spend in SMS dropped by 3.5 billion, or 3.14 billion, based on what we're predicting for 2023. So where's that going? Some of that is going to go on WhatsApp, but otherwise, that is a lot of money available to be invested in other platforms. So I think, in terms of where we are, we probably will see an acceleration of that shift away, certainly away from SMS and onto other solutions.
And I do feel your pain. Thanks, Nick. I feel your pain about maybe different generations. My dad did call me yesterday to ask how he could log into his O2 account because he'd been charged an extra 12p he wasn't expecting, and he wanted to know why. And actually, the answer was a text message to Germany, for texting my cousin. But I had to log in with his password to find that out, and now he's happy. But I guess back to your point, Nick, as well about consumer adoption, one of the things I was looking at, in preparation for this panel was the adoption of Apple Pay, which I'm sure all of us use, maybe very, very often these days. But if you look, that was launched in 2014 by Tim Cook to great fanfare. Amazing new technology, customers are going to love it, everyone's going to have it in 2 years' time, 100% penetration. But actually, 4 years later, it hadn't even achieved nearly 20% adoption. Despite its utility, despite the fact you could make larger payments with ease. So I think your point's right, Nick. Consumers, they don't have to adopt new technologies unless they see a really good reason to do that, or a real benefit to do that. And oftentimes you don't get the benefit until you've adopted it. So it's kind of a catch-22. KY, your predictions for passwordless and how you see it in the next few years?
Yeah, I don't really have a prediction. I mean, those of you who come from telcos, the cycle of things to be. But I think I want to echo that to say that it really depends on, are we really solving the pain points of our end users and enterprises who use our services? If we are, I think the adoption will come naturally and the curve will be there. And I think it's key when we do APIs, it has to augment existing processes and regulations. And I think that will then speed up the pathway to that. That's how we see that. And more importantly, whether really we are helping the industry move forward. And service providers like ourselves, I think we got to step up and be more open about it versus cannibalizing the revenues or whether we trust each other. I think as service providers, we should step up to mitigate that threat that our end customers are facing.
Thanks very much. And Paul, your predictions?
5 to 10 years. I mean, I think it depends if something's going to drive it. And it could be that AI does, right? So AI is coming, it's deep fakes, it's going to help with the phishing. And so you need some sort of possession factor-based solution. And passkeys can do that. It's got the rollout challenges and user adoption challenges, but we need to keep pushing it. But the one thing that I think that we need to push too, which is the thing we've all got in our pockets, because it's also possession factor. So you probably need a twin track approach. We need to push passkeys, but we need to push phone number-based mobile identity too, because it works today and it can fix the AI problem for all of us.
Thanks very much. And finally, Christian, give us your crystal ball, please.
All right, I've been thinking a little bit about this one. So I think for us, the way that we think about this problem at Google is when we can stop a person on the side of the street and ask them, how many times did you log in today to a service? And when half of those logins were done passwordlessly, I think we've reached that tipping point, so 50%. We've kind of gone back and forth on when exactly that date is going to be. Right now, because we're feeling particularly bullish this year with the adoption and stuff that we've seen, I personally think that we might be able to reach that tipping point towards the end of 2026, early 2027. So that means about 3 years away. Given the I guess, the trajectory at which we have seen these solutions become adopted. But there is one thing, and again, comes in something that Paul just mentioned, which is we need to meet the industry where they are, not just the users, but also the developers. And that is why we're trying to make it as easy as possible on our platforms to adopt passkeys. And I'd love to make it as easy as possible on our platforms to adopt mobile identity as well, making it easy. We know there is a massive need under developers for stronger authentication, and there is a need for phone number-based authentication. We know it. We can look at the statistics, that were shared here on SMS-based OTP. We should help to make it as simple as possible. The current ecosystem is hard. It's hard for smaller developers to get into the ecosystem and to use things in a way which don't cost an arm and a leg. And I'm not only talking about higher prices, I'm talking about fraud. We as Google are seeing so much fraud on SMS A2P channels today. And companies like Twitter or X shut down SMS OTP because of those numbers of fraud. We're not quite there yet, but we actively battle those numbers. We'd love to introduce a mechanism that gives these technologies and makes these things available, or abilities available, to even smaller developers, but at a price point where it makes sense for those businesses by taking some of the fraud and some of the issues we're seeing off the table.
Thanks, Christian. So, very bullish perspective and prediction there. I'm probably at the longer end than you, maybe 4 or 5 years towards sort of 30-40% penetration. But I hope we get there sooner, because it's in the interest of consumers and brands, in fact, relying parties to get there as soon as possible. I would say, of course, the telcos are trying to play a role in that. We've talked a lot about seamless authentication. This conference has very much been about Open Gateway, which is the new telco community getting together, and the GSMA initiative for building out standardized APIs with Kamara. And one of those launch products is Number Verify, which is our phone number authentication product. And we want to play our part in this ecosystem and help that evolution towards passwordless, and make that happen as soon as possible. So I think we don't have any time for questions, sadly. So please thank the panel, and hopefully it's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you. We could have carried on, but we've got to move on because we've got some really good presentations to follow. So let us now turn to how digital identity considerations play across sectors. And to start us off, please welcome Julia Fesser. Julia oversees MasterCard's identity and post-transaction services in Europe. And in particular, she leads product management and go-to-market of consumer authentication, identity verification, and digital identity. Welcome, Julia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Fesser, and as I was just introduced, I do have the pleasure to lead our identity solutions at MasterCard in Europe. And today, and honestly, I'm very grateful for this panel, because it couldn't have been lined up any more nicely than it was just now. I do want to indeed speak to you about a world beyond passwords. So I thought, but I just learned something new. I thought that any person has approximately 100 accounts. I just heard it was 240. And I was surprised when it was asked in the beginning, in the previous session, whether people are bothered by their passwords, and only a few hands actually showed up. But then if you think about it, it's probably not even surprising, because you're not bothered by your passwords when you remember them. But you are very much bothered by them when you don't. And if everyone indeed has 100 or even 240 accounts where you have some sort of credentials, I guarantee you will not remember all of your passwords unless you reuse the exact same one everywhere, which then we have another problem. So, we all know this. We don't know all of the passwords we're using. In fact, 1 in 2 people have to reset their password once a month, and 15% even multiple times per week. That probably doesn't apply to the accounts where you log into on a daily or weekly basis. Those hopefully you might be able to remember, but the ones you do not use as frequently, the chance that you would have to reset a password is, well, likely. And to be very honest, I just had the same problem when I downloaded the Mobile World Congress app, and I registered like, I don't know, 2-3 months ago. The password, well, was a little bit lost on me. Let's put it like this. So now, why is resetting a password such a big problem, aside from potential, security breaches? It takes, on average, approximately 4 minutes to reset a password. So if you think about the fact that, the average attention span of people nowadays is less than 5 seconds, 4 minutes is an eternity. Having, instead of, doing whatever task you wanted to do, be it making a payment or accessing an account, whatever it is, now having to come up with another password, 8 digits, a number, a special character, well knowing that by the next time you return to that website, you will have again forgotten it, is just painful. So what do we do about it? The reality is that in very many cases, we are trying to make our lives a little bit easier by using very simple and easy to remember passwords. And yes, the ones that are here are still globally the most used passwords, and it's not changing. Or the other thing, what we also know, probably even a lot of people in this room are doing very often, is reusing the same password. So if one account gets breached, you're making it very easy for fraudsters, because then they can also access all sorts of other accounts. Both obviously is not a great idea. In fact, from the time of 2016 to 2021, approximately 24 billion credentials have been stolen, and 81% of hacking attempts are related or are actually successful because of weak and easy to guess type of credentials and passwords. So, I hope that some of these data points make it very clear that passwords definitely are not only not convenient, but also from a security perspective, let's say an issue that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. Now, if I take a look at the payment industry, for obvious reasons, authentication is an extremely important part of the payment process, at least if you are a European citizen who is trying to make an online payment within Europe, where indeed we do have active regulation, which requires a consumer to perform what is called strong customer authentication. Strong customer authentication means that if I want to make a purchase at a merchant, I need to verify my identity to my card issuing bank, and I need to have 2 independent factors. It could be anything from knowledge to possession, like my smartphone, for example, or biometry, so a facial recognition, a fingerprint, something like this. Now, with this adoption of this regulation, we have seen, and this is actual data from our payment network, the most, let's say, successful technology today are so-called out-of-band authentication methods. Out-of-band means that I'm at the merchant website, I want to complete a payment, and now I'm being redirected to my banking environment, for example, my mobile banking app. I now log in, ideally leveraging facial recognition instead of yet another password. I then, within the secure environment of my bank, approve or decline a transaction, and then I go back to my merchant. And as you can see here, it's not only the most widely adopted solution nowadays in payments in Europe, it's also the most successful one with an 87% success rate. Even better than, let's say, the second best option over passwords, which is still SMS OTP. We definitely see that this is, at the moment, sort of the best we can do. But obviously, technology is evolving, things are moving forward. And so we believe that we're now at this tipping point where the next evolution step is going to come. And it was mentioned it was mentioned on the previous panel. So we're not alone in this attempt to make authentication more seamless and more secure. Fast Identity Online, or the FIDO Alliance, has been founded in 2013. They have now, I think, more than 250 members, of which MasterCard is a member. And I think the standard they're introducing and they're leveraging by introducing the concept of an authenticator, or sort of man in the middle, so that you don't have to actually share all your data anymore with any third party. You keep your data to yourself and only share a sort of encrypted version externally with a third party, will make, let's say, logins and authentications definitely more secure. And as soon as regulatory-wise they're also approved, passkeys will also be approved for PSD2, which we're all waiting for, then I think we will also see this standard being used in the payment space in Europe much more. So what I would like to do very briefly is bring it to life a little bit, because there's, passkey and standards and technology is all, interesting, but I think when we see, it in real life, how it could actually change the way we make payments today, that's when it gets really interesting. So what you can see here is, a website. So you are using, your tablet Sunday afternoon. You want to buy something for yourself. Now you've entered your credentials and you sort of want to complete the payment. Now, as I've mentioned, how it works today before sort of this FIDO solution is you would now say, I placed the order. Either you get a push notification or you need to pick up your phone, log into your banking app, and then approve or decline the transaction. That's doable. It works. But still, you need to have a second device with you. If you're sitting on your couch, your phone might be somewhere else. It's not perfect. There are better ways to do it. So the way it could work in the future is that simply by using your biometrics, which are enabled by the consumer device that you're using, that's going to be as simple as it gets. So you're using the biometrics of the device, and you're basically done. You're being recognized, you approve, and you have a success. And that's it. I think if you consider the journey we've been on, from passwords to SMS OTP to the currently most widely used out-of-band technology, we have steadily improved, but I do believe that this is sort of the next evolution step, which the industry will adopt to and which will make our lives more easy, but also more secure. So if I try to summarize very briefly, the way we look at authentication in general, and I obviously talked here about payment use cases, but ultimately, I was trying to bring the technology to life for a specific use case, which is payment. But obviously, that same technology can be used in all sorts of different use cases, like accessing an account, etc. We believe there are different sort of guiding principles that are important to, to make our world a little bit more secure, but also convenient. One very important aspect is about collaboration. Sharing data, and I specifically want to call this out because I'm in Europe, for the purpose of fraud prevention and nothing else. Sharing data points is going to be extremely important. Leveraging state-of-the-art AI-driven technology to assess the risk of any type of digital interaction. And finally, whenever an active authentication, so something that is needed to be completed by the consumer, is needed, use biometrics and use technology that make it as easy and as simple as possible to complete the authentication. That will, help to make things easier and more convenient. Well, thank you.
Authentication is more seamless than the clicker. Thank you, Julia. Let's now turn our attention to the plans for digital identity wallets in Europe. Agustin Diaz-Pines is Deputy Head of the Future Connectivity Systems Unit at the European Commission, and he focuses on developments in 5G and 6G as part of the Digital Decade strategy. Please welcome Agustin.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for inviting me to participate in this session. I would like to present today European Commission contribution to some of the problems you've just described. Let's see how this can help those problems. I will present the European Digital Identity Wallet initiative that tries to address some of the challenges that we find before, because some of you know, I hope all of you know, there are already electronic ID at the European level. There was a regulation back in 2014, so this is nothing new. However, these European IDs were only working in some member states and were reaching overall 60% of the population, and the take-up is very low today. So this is not working. So the European Digital Identity Wallet proposal is aiming to address also one of the digital strategy targets of the European Commission, which is having online services accessible to all and having electronic IDs for all citizens. So this is our aim, and this is our response to these challenges in digital identification. And some of the functions that it will have is mainly authenticating yourself, securely identify yourself when accessing public and also private services, being able to store documents, sign documents, and present, your university certificate, for example, in a secure way, and being able to sign those documents, and of course, being able to access these services across borders. So most of these schemes, they only work in one country. So whenever you move, they don't work anymore. So the EID, the digital identity wallet, will have to work cross-border. Will have to be accepted everywhere in the EU. It is an open solution, or let's say many open solutions. So member states will have, and that's an obligation for them, they will have to propose and implement electronic identity scheme, and I mean, that will be an obligation, and this will be based. There can be more than one by member states. I mean, there can be many of them, and they are based on open source, open specifications, and also on an open source reference implementation. So there was a choice we made. Also, from a security perspective, it is all open source, and then of course I will talk about that later. There are different. Well, there is a prototype. There will be evolving and different specifications ongoing. Well, this is the ecosystem, and this is the presentation we have on this initiative for all sorts of fora and stakeholders. I wanted to keep it like this because you see the OEMs or the device manufacturers are mentioned in some of the lines there, but are not specifically one of them, and also the mobile operators are not one of them, although they participate in part of it. So we have ourselves, European institutions, the government bodies, the relying parties on this identity, the issuers of, for example, paper IDs, the users, and then the wallet providers and the large-scale pilots that we're funding to advance and to test this technology. And there is where electronic identity providers, OEMs, and operators have to play a role. The regulation was proposed in 2021, and now we're reaching the latest stages of the negotiation. The final vote in the parliament to approve this regulation is expected to take place in March. I think after tomorrow there is actually a reading of a text at the parliament happening. So this is actually, and also the commission proposes a regulation, then both council, member states and the parliament have to adopt it. And that's it's happening basically now. So this is the very last stages of the process. This is, well, I should say the first part of the process. Then this is technically complex, and there will be what we call implementing acts following the next 6 to 12 months, where we will lay out the requirements and address some of the technical specifications of the references of this. So that will happen hopefully by the end of this year, and the final wallet we hope to have them in the market by 2026. I know it's not for tomorrow, but well, this is in European policy making. These are usually the timelines. I talk about the pilots that are funded by the European Commission. There are 4 of them. There will be more of them, and they address specific use cases. I have a list of use cases later in the next slide, but these are the 4 of them. I mean, some of them address very specific ones. For example, one on EWC on travel. That one called Potential, there mobile operators are present and OEMs as well, and they address a myriad of use cases. Well, the obvious one, which is registering a SIM card, but others as well, such as opening a bank account, mobile driving license, and so forth. So these pilots are testing these use cases. There might be others, but just to give you some examples, whenever you rent a car, I mean, you're asked for all your documents, right? Your ID, your mobile driving license, and it can take a while. So this would be a way to present all those documents in a seamless way, even before picking up the car, so that everything's done. As mentioned before, opening a bank account, that's a very obvious one, and let alone asking for a mortgage at your bank. All these documents can be safely stored, and you can have access with the European Digital Identity Wallet. But there are many of them, so you can see there. I invite you to take a look at the website of the pilots to see what they're checking. So these are the next steps of the regulation. I briefly mentioned them. So as I mentioned, the final adoption is imminent. And then there will be a lot of work on these implementing acts, all these pilots. These pilots are also testing these specifications. There's also a prototype already there, and this is evolving. So we expect, as I said, the wallet to be available in 2026. But it is a requirement. I mean, member states do have to provide at least one per member states. And then I have this on the next slide on what the mobile industry could do to address those, to be part of the ecosystem, to address the challenges of adopting the wallets. And first I would like to start, and that's with the obligations part. And sorry about that, but I had to mention that. So mobile operators are crucial for accessing the secure elements in the mobile phones. So this is a requirement. It is there in the text of the regulation, but there has to be access in reasonable terms to secure elements, NFC, UICC, and others in the devices for this to be able to happen. So these operators and OEMs cannot refuse access. I know the responsibility is shared between typically the MNO and the OEM to release control and to give access to these components, but without that it will not happen. And that's the enabling part of the mobile industry is about, you have a relationship with the customers already. You know their name, their number, and this is a huge opportunity both for us, for citizens to adopt the wallet, and also for the mobile industry. Operators can also help in onboarding users. They have their customers, their sales channels, and so forth. They could also distribute the wallets, and then of course, the business model is always a question, because at least for private citizens, these wallets need to be provided for free. I mean, you cannot charge citizens for using that. You could charge private companies for using that, but not citizens. So there should be a business model. But I mean, I have in my phone, I have so many for free, or for me, free features. I don't know, the clock, or the alarm, and others that are there. There should be one of them going forward. And then be more specific, well, we have the obvious case of registering a SIM card. That's something operators already do, so they should be able to do it with this technology, with the wallet. But they could, participate in other use cases, and they are already doing in this pilot I just showed. And so this is a question for you, which vertical uses could be interesting for you to participate. And then, of course, there will be future pilots and future testing of these cases. So that's an opportunity to be part of this ecosystem. So I leave it there. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some time left for the final part of this session, where we'd like to bring back Julia and discuss how the mobile industry can collaborate with both public and private sectors to build tomorrow's identity solutions. And leading this discussion will be Andrzej Horowski. Andrzej leads the digital identity activities of Deutsche Telekom, and he also serves as chairman of the GSMA European Identity Group. So Andrzej, please come, and Julia.
Still, good morning, everyone. It was a fantastic discussion we started this morning around authentication. So I'd like to cover a bit more broader part with a panel and especially focus around collaboration across industries. So telecommunications, or broader than mobile industry, working together with public sector, with governments, but also with private industries like payment. Starting with Julia. So Julia, it's really great to have you here with us. And as we know, or at least as some of us know, MasterCard has a lot of capabilities and expertise in a broader cyber intelligent space for financial institutions providing services to reduce the fraud. So as you know, mobile operators have also capabilities like fraud prevention services. Some of them were highlighted at the Mobile World Congress around GSMA mobile open gateway initiatives, where we are coming up with unified APIs across not only Europe, but on a global scale. So question I'd like to start is why, from your perspective as a MasterCard, do you believe the collaboration with mobile industry for fraud prevention would make sense for MasterCard, and how mobile intelligence could utilize along existing fraud prevention tools which MasterCard have in the field?
Great question. So what most people or most consumers probably don't know, whenever you make a payment transaction, there are a whole lot of stakeholders involved in making that transaction technically happen. So you're going to a web merchant. Then that merchant is using a payment service provider to help them with the technology behind processing the payment. Then there is an acquiring bank who is going to process the actual payment transaction for the merchant. And then there's the card issuer, so the entity who gave you your payment card. All of these entities need to somehow verify whether you are you when you are making a transaction. The challenge each of these entities have, they have very different sets of information about you. So, and very little, to be clear. So the 16-digit card number that is on front of your MasterCard alone is not enough to verify whether I'm actually the person to whom this card belongs. So to your point, collaboration across the industry is key to assess the risk of a transaction in the case of payments, but also in the case of any type of digital interaction. And I think we have a great opportunity to work together more closely to better assess risks of transactions. And if we do so, it will be for the greater good of people.
Have you got some examples or ideas which you could share here with the audience, with us, of application where mobile intelligence is applied to improve fraud detection for financial transactions, for payment?
Yes. So there is all sorts of information. So for example, the geolocation is important. So I typically, when I spend online, I probably do this from home. Sometimes obviously all elsewhere, but very often I will do my transactions from home. If all of a sudden a transaction comes from a completely different geolocation, that is an indicator of potential risk. And who's better positioned to actually share the real, let's say, location of a consumer than a telco would be? Then obviously I'm making simple examples. There's other examples, like take, for example, how you hold a device, how you type data points into a device. All these type of aspects can help to verify whether someone is who they claim to be. But once again, no one single entity has these information. And so I think by working together and by collaborating, and once again, for the specific purpose of fraud prevention and nothing else, is incredibly important to make user experiences, user journeys easy, but also more secure than what they are today.
But as we know, fraudsters, bad actors are very, very intelligent in terms of adopting new technologies and inventing new type of fraud patterns. It was very much eye-opening for me joining MasterCard at their RiskX event a couple of months back here in Barcelona. So, Julia, could you please share with us, with audience, which emerging fraud threats to payment transaction do you predict in the near future, let's say in 3 years to come, and how mobile industry could potentially help to fight this?
Yeah, indeed. Unfortunately, whenever we manage to successfully fight a fraud trend, something new comes up. So when the PSD2 regulation was introduced, or since that adoption, I think the card payment fraud went down significantly, which is good. That's exactly what the regulator intended with this regulation. Unfortunately, what we are seeing happening now, more and more, is fraudsters using social engineering and tricking people to authorize things under false pretenses. So authorizing, for example, a payment under false pretenses. Now, the thing is, with active authentication, you can no longer fight this because it is indeed the consumer who is authorizing this, but they don't know exactly what they're authorizing. And so this is, in my mind, another very good example where risk assessment, once again, a telco would know whether someone is doing something from their device or whether someone else is entering maybe the SMS one-time password that was just sent to a different device. So I think if this new or not, it's not really new, but it's scaling these days. Social engineering cannot just be fixed by consumers having better passwords or more secure whatever authentication. Data is data, and risk assessment is key to address this type of fraud threat.
Thank you, Jolie. It was very insightful. So now, last but not least, Augustine, a really great presentation. I could say you've made my day. So we as mobile operators are very keen and happy to collaborate, as you know, with both European Commission and member state on co-creating the eIDAS 2.0, the new upcoming digital European ID ecosystem. And in our view, this will be one of the key pillars for the Europe sovereignty for at least next decade. Let me start the question with a simple one related to what are the prerequisites in your view to make the new digital ID ecosystem and the wallets successful in terms of adoptions and usage by the citizens. So you line up a lot of ingredients which are sort of our master plan, the preparation, what needs to be done. But how, at the end of the day, do you believe will convince citizens and businesses and residents as well to use them?
So absolutely, this is what we're aiming at. And I gave an example of a previous not very successful approach. And we're aiming for wide adoption on this. Well, we see as a catalyzer of a wider adoption, citizens need to be that this is useful, so that they make their life easier. And we see, and that's a requirement as well, that they can use it in public services. So the moment that you spare time and nuisance to consumers and to citizens to do their public procedures, then they will have something that they have gained. Then ease of use, and we know many examples of the industry of unsuccessful initiatives, and but it has to be easy to use, and so it has to be tested and well designed, and so that it's not cumbersome to use it. So that's another point. And then more broadly, that it's not only the public services, but also that it's accepted widely. I mean, we have specific provisions there that has to be accepted by public services for sure, by private ones for certain ones that are require a strong authentication, and indeed opening a bank account and payments is one of them. But also there are provisions there that what we call very large online platforms, well, you know the names, they also have to accept them. So we hope that this is going to give traction, so that people really see a value and start using it.
You've covered in your presentation a lot of elements which you indicate as opportunities for mobile operators, or in broader terms for mobile industry. So just to recap a few of them for us, for mobile operators to participate in the ecosystem as a rallying party, to accept and introduce the EU ID wallets to be used in our digital processes. For example, when we onboard a new customer and are obligated by our regulation to verify the identity, or the other one, which is quite a new element for us, and we are very keen to get into that role, issuer. So mobile operators to be an issuer of verifiable credentials like a mobile phone number. So that's something very, very important, because as we all know, nowadays in any digital interaction with any type of vertical, everybody is asking, so every B2B brand is asking for a mobile phone number to stay in touch with us, with the consumer, to communicate basically. And we as a mobile operators have a unique position to cover and manage all the life cycles behind the mobile phone numbers. Or the last but not least, to help the EU ID wallets in authentication processes, to bring it to the what we know EIDAS level high requirements. So we have certain proposals and ideas. And what would be your, let's say, suggestions for us for the mobile industry? So which avenues we should go? Which elements are, from your perspective, the most important one to focus on for the mobile industry, for mobile operators?
I mean, you mentioned already a few. I mean, I think the key here is that mobile industry finds the right partnerships and the right role in this ecosystem. So I would encourage the industry to talk to the other players here, payment providers, for example, to see really a model. I mean, it's about a business model in the end. I mean, I think the mobile industry needs to have an incentive to play a role here. And I also mentioned that for citizens, this is for free. I mean, there's no payment expected from citizens. But I would encourage to talk to I show the ecosystem there to different providers and different actors in this ecosystem to find really opportunities for cooperation. I also have another point on possible how to facilitate this. The mobile industry could do. There's a lot of standardization on this going on. About secure elements, interaction with these services and so forth, and the mobile industry has a strong role in standardizing this. Strong role in standards in general, but this could also be part of that. So we should also benefit from the industry's position in the standardization organizations.
You've mentioned that the sustainable business model will be a critical, important element for EIDAS to be successful. And as we already know, and you iterated it twice, the wallet as such will be supposed to be free for citizens, and we know we as citizens are also taxpayers. But with regard to the business model, so what would be your what are your views or ideas about how, let's say, in general, the business model for EIDAS will look like? Just to give us some orientation where the Commission's thinking is going to.
I mean, I see what I showed there, the role of the wallet provider. That should be the company or the organization providing this service, and then it will have to work with the public and the private sector to find some sustainable business model. One thing I need to mention before is that this wallet can be used private companies can also use it. And this is, and they could pay for that, and they could benefit from this service. So this is, although citizens cannot be charged for using this model, but companies for authenticating the processes could. So we need to see how this. I think the business to business, or rather say government to business, part of it is important for the whole sustainability of the system. And then it can be the wallet issuer can be a public organization, can be a private one, it has to be certified, but there's quite some freedom there. It is only the obligation that there has to be at least one per member state.
So thank you, Julia. Thank you, Agustin. But before we close the session, maybe one final so-called call to action to mobile industry, to mobile operators. What would be? Julia first.
Again, for me, it's really about the collaboration. Let's figure out how can we cooperate, how can we work together in a good way to make, let's say, life a little bit easier and a little bit more secure for people, which is going to be most important to make sure that we keep the trust of people. Every time someone is a victim of fraud, they're losing trust in the system, and that's like the worst sort of damage that happens even beyond the money. So let's figure out how we can together overcome this and have better solutions than the bad guys do.
Agustin?
I would say think this service as an opportunity for offering a nicer, more attractive offer to the users. And I'm thinking about another industry, probably nothing to do with cars. I mean, we constantly have additional features that are added to the car that are sold to make them attractive. So in this case, for mobile operators, and it should be one added value in the market that they can show.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your contribution to all of you. I'm afraid we don't have time, unfortunately, for a question from the audience, but we will be here for a couple of minutes. So, folks, if you have some burning question, please reach out to us. Thank you.